Behind every great empire lies a single, often overlooked resource. Not armies, not ideology, a commodity. Something pulled from the earth, harvested from a field, or fished from a sea, and then leveraged into staggering power. Salt built kingdoms in Africa, spice launched fleets across oceans, oil rewrote the 20th century. In each case, geography handed one civilization a monopoly, and that civilization turned it into wealth, weapons, and influence that reshaped the world. But monopolies never last forever. New trade routes, new technologies, and new rivals always emerge. And when the resource fades, so does the empire built upon it. Today we're counting down 10 empires whose entire existence hinged on controlling one specific commodity. From the gold caravans of medieval Mali to the rubber barons of the Amazon, from the silver mountains of Bolivia to the Guano islands of Peru, these stories reveal a hidden pattern in history. Power, it turns out, often comes down to who owns the resource everyone else desperately needs. Let's begin. In the 14th century, the Mali Empire of West Africa controlled roughly half the gold supply of the entire Old World. Its emperor, Mansa Musa, is still considered by many historians the wealthiest individual in recorded history. When he traveled to Mecca in 1324, his caravan reportedly included 60,000 men and camels loaded with gold dust. He gave away so much of it in Cairo that the price of gold there crashed for over a decade. Mali's power flowed from the gold fields of Bambouk and Bouré near the Senegal and Niger rivers. Trans-Saharan caravans hauled this gold north to exchange it for salt, cloth, and books, fueling the legendary university city of Timbuktu. For nearly 2 centuries, Mali was the financial heart of the medieval world, but internal succession disputes, Tuareg raids, and shifting trade routes toward the Atlantic coast drained the empire's wealth. By the 17th century, Mali had fragmented. The gold remained, but the empire that had monopolized its flow was gone. For 400 years, the Republic of Venice was Europe's gateway to the east, and the resource that made it rich was spice. Pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves arrived in Venetian warehouses from Egypt and the Levant, then sold across Europe at markups of over 1,000%. A single sack of black pepper could buy a country estate. Venice's merchant fleet, the largest in the Mediterranean, ran on a state-managed system called the Muda, armed convoys that protected the spice trade from pirates and rivals. The Doge's treasury bulged. The city built marble palaces on wooden piles in a lagoon. But in 1498, the Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama reached India by sailing around Africa, bypassing the Mediterranean entirely. Suddenly, spices reached Lisbon directly, undercutting Venetian prices. The Republic clung on for another 2 centuries, but its golden age was over. The single resource that had built one of Europe's most beautiful cities had slipped through its fingers, rerouted by a single ocean voyage. In 1545, Spanish colonizers discovered a mountain in modern-day Bolivia that was made almost entirely of silver. They called it Cerro Rico, the rich hill. Over the next 2 centuries, Potosí produced roughly 60% of all the silver mined on Earth. That silver flowed across the Atlantic in massive treasure fleets, financing Spain's wars, its Baroque churches, and its dominance of Europe. At its peak, Potosí had a population larger than London or Paris. But the wealth came at a horrific human cost. Indigenous and African laborers were forced to work under the Mita system, deep in mercury-poisoned tunnels. Hundreds of thousands died. Ironically, all that silver flooding into Europe triggered massive inflation, the so-called price revolution, which weakened the Spanish economy from within. By the 17th century, the mountain's richest veins were exhausted. Spain's empire entered a long decline. One mountain had built a global superpower, funded a continent of cathedrals, and ultimately, through its own abundance, helped break the empire it had created. The 17th century Dutch Republic became Europe's richest nation thanks to one resource above all: spices controlled by the Dutch East India Company, known as the VOC. Founded in 1602, the VOC was the world's first multinational corporation and the first to issue tradable shares. It seized the Banda Islands in modern Indonesia, where the nutmeg tree grew nowhere else on Earth, and enforced a brutal monopoly, massacring or enslaving the indigenous population to control supply. A small bag of nutmeg in Amsterdam could make a sailor rich for life. The profits funded Dutch dominance of global shipping, the founding of New Amsterdam, later New York, and the Dutch golden age of art and science. Rembrandt and Vermeer painted in cities financed by clove and mace. But by the late 18th century, British competition, corruption inside the VOC, and falling spice prices bankrupted the company. The Dutch monopoly collapsed. The empire built on aromatic seeds quietly faded, though Amsterdam's Grand Canal houses still stand as monuments to it. The British Empire of the 19th century was the largest in human history, and one resource above all powered its industrial heart: cotton. Raw cotton, grown by enslaved laborers in the American South, India, and Egypt, was shipped to the mills of Lancashire and Manchester. There, steam-powered machines spun and wove it into cloth that was sold back to those same colonies and to the entire world. By 1860, Britain produced half of the world's cotton textiles. Manchester earned the nickname Cottonopolis. Entire cities, Liverpool, Bolton, Preston, rose on the trade. The wealth fueled the Royal Navy, the railways, and London's banking dominance. But Britain's cotton empire was built on a moral catastrophe: the transatlantic slave trade and brutal colonial exploitation in India, where local weavers were deliberately ruined to create captive markets. After 1900, cheaper production in Asia and America began to undercut Lancashire. The mills emptied. By the late 20th century, almost nothing remained. The fabric that clothed the world had unraveled the empire that made it. It might be the strangest empire on this list, because the resource that made 19th century Peru briefly one of South America's wealthiest nations was bird droppings. On a handful of dry, windless islands off the Peruvian coast, seabirds had deposited guano for thousands of years, layers up to 50 meters thick. European farmers discovered it was the most powerful natural fertilizer ever found, packed with nitrogen and phosphates. Between 1840 and 1880, Peru exported around 12 million tons of guano, earning today's equivalent of tens of billions of dollars. The Peruvian government nationalized the deposits and used the income to abolish slavery, build railways, and modernize Lima. But the boom was brutally short-lived. Chinese indentured laborers worked in horrific conditions on the islands. The guano itself was finite, and once Germany's Fritz Haber invented synthetic fertilizer in 1909, the market collapsed entirely. Peru, having borrowed heavily against future guano revenue, defaulted and lost territory in the disastrous War of the Pacific. An empire of bird droppings, risen and vanished in 40 years. In 1938, American geologists struck oil in eastern Saudi Arabia. Within 40 years, the kingdom, a country that had been one of the poorest places on earth, became the most influential energy power in modern history. Saudi Arabia sits atop roughly 17% of the world's proven petroleum reserves. The state oil company, Saudi Aramco, is the most profitable corporation ever recorded, earning over $160 billion in a single year. Oil revenue transformed the country. Riyadh grew from a mud-walled town into a skyscraper metropolis. Universities, hospitals, and highways appeared in a generation. As a founding member of OPEC, Saudi Arabia helped trigger the 1973 oil embargo, which doubled global fuel prices overnight and forced Western economies into recession. But the kingdom's leadership knows the era of oil is finite. Plans like Vision 2030 aim to diversify into tourism, technology, and renewable energy before demand peaks. Whether Saudi Arabia can outlast its single resource or share the fate of every empire before it remains the open question. From Mansa Musa's gold caravans to Saudi oil tankers, the pattern repeats with eerie precision. A nation stumbles onto a resource the world desperately wants. It builds infrastructure, armies, and palaces. It becomes a superpower, for a while. Then a new trade route opens, a new technology arrives, a new rival emerges, or the resource simply runs out. The empire fades, but its monuments remain. Today, the resources are changing again. Lithium, rare earth metals, semiconductors, and fresh water are quietly reshaping global power. The countries that control them, Chile, China, Taiwan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, may well become the empires of the 21st century. Or they may, like Venice and Peru before them, discover that single resource power is a fragile crown. History rarely repeats exactly, but it rhymes loudly. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden engines of empire, subscribe to TheSuperfy for more weekly investigations into the forces that quietly shape our world. Thanks for watching, we'll see you in the next one.